I'm joined by Parag Khanna. He's author of The Second World, Empires and Influences in the New Global Order, and an analyst with the New America Foundation, a nonpartisan think tank. He's joining us now live from New York. And thanks for joining us. I understand you were there in Xinjiang recently. Take us there to Urumqi and just how dominant is the Han Chinese population and the Uyghur population?
Good to be with you, Christy. As the previous package that you showed in the imagery from Urumqi, it looks a bit like what the Han Chinese have branded the city as, which is the Shanghai of the Northern Silk Road, a very developed metropolis connecting really China's gateway to Central Asia, a very modern and progressive place. But underneath the surface, of course, as your statistics showed, in that city in particular, the real capital of the region, Han Chinese now outnumber the ethnic Uyghurs, the Muslim Uyghurs, quite significantly, and that has led to a great deal of deep-seated tension that has actually been there for over 50 years because, of course, the Develop the West campaign that China undertook really began at the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. So the tension that we see happening today is really something that has happened cyclically every few years, really, ever since the 1950s. So when you travel in the region, you will find both the sort of evidence of development, big buildings and nice roads, and certainly many Uyghurs have been given jobs, but you will also find, if you travel in other parts of Xinjiang, and it is China's largest province actually, really dilapidated villages, very rundown areas, really quite a nomadic lifestyle that you see further west in Central Asia where the other Turkic peoples are. So there's tremendous disparities in the region, and you mentioned the mosques being shut down this Friday. The same thing actually has happened every few years whenever this sort of tension has bubbled over and the Chinese authorities have needed a way to prevent Uyghurs from coming together and planning any sort of further protests or agitation.
Urumqi right now is in lockdown. Troops are out in force. The Chinese President Hu Jintao left the G8 summit to go back to China to deal with the crisis there. Does Beijing see the unrest in Xinjiang, the situation there, as such a threat that could hurt potentially its sovereignty?
This is a very strategic region for China, as you mentioned. It has a tremendous amount of natural resources, but again, it is the gateway to Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and other Central Asian states that are also energy rich. So for China, this is a non-negotiable part of the territorial integrity of the Chinese state, in the same way that we heard China speak about Tibet last year in the March protests that preceded the Olympic Games. So clearly it is a threat, but most people would not go so far as to say that there is a renewed risk of secession or Uyghur independence. That dream has probably passed because, of course, already Han Chinese greatly outnumber Uyghurs in the area, and then there's, of course, the very strong Chinese military presence. But the fact that Hu Jintao had to return from the G8 summit is obviously not only, on the one hand, embarrassing, but it also shows that they were caught off guard by this in the same way that last year they were caught off guard by the scale of the Tibetan protests as well. So clearly they haven't developed a strategy that is working in a sustainable way to deal with the region.
Rabia Kadir, the exiled Uyghur leader who's based in Washington, D.C. in the United States, she has asked for not independence, but self-determination for Uyghur people in China. How realistic is that?
It's not realistic, precisely for the same reasons that one could describe the Tibet situation. Autonomy tends to be the word that is used a bit more historically in talking about the potential different pattern of relations between Xinjiang and sort of main China, as well as Tibet and Han China. And really, a bit more autonomy or self-governance is something that has been on the table in the past. The Dalai Lama has in fact asked for it as well for Tibet, but that's clearly not something that that Beijing is willing to grant. So I don't think that that what Ms. Kadir and others have asked for is going to be respected or acknowledged in any way. I think that the kind of crackdown that we're seeing is the way in which China is going to deal with this situation. And if there's a policy change in terms of a few more handouts or better assimilation programs that come after this, that remains to be seen. But I don't think that anyone in Beijing will allow any talk of self-determination or greater autonomy anytime soon.
Parag Khanna, some great insight there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Christy.